of course, in our modern science, nothing's going on, right? It's just in their brains. So essentially, the people are crazy. Is
That's
the
right. That's how
general assumption from science is that the people are crazy. All these experiencers are crazy, and so this person or family that took part in your first study, this gave them some proof, right? Validation, I guess, in their brains that
validation.
they
That's right.
weren't crazy. Actually, there is something physically going on. So for them, it was proof enough to where they're going to invest, it sounds like hundreds of thousands of dollars at least, to support this study.
Yeah. So they wanted, so what they felt is that it changed their life so dramatically. They felt that they wanted to help me have all sorts of people get to the point where all these experiencers that have all these intrepidations and problems with their life to actually help them.
Chris Lehto, welcome to LehtoFiles.
Welcome to LehtoFiles. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Jim Segala. Jim is a physicist and engineer with years of experience working on advanced sensor systems to detect and study unexplained phenomena. He was part of the research team at Skinwalker Ranch. You may have seen him there, collaborating with top scientists like Dr. Hal Puthoff. He's worked with him in the past. Jim's work focuses on high-tech measurement systems, including the MooPass sensor suite that we'll talk about, designed to capture anomalies in radiation, electromagnetic fields, and atmospheric changes, among other things. With deep knowledge of government research programs and cutting-edge physics, Jim brings a unique perspective on the UAP mystery. Welcome to the show, Jim. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for inviting me here.
Okay, yeah, thanks for being here. You've worked on advanced sensor systems to detect anomalies. From a scientific standpoint, what measurable physical evidence have you captured that suggests UAPs are real?
Well, it goes back to a few years ago, or probably 10 years ago, when I was working at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin under Hal Puthoff. I was put on a team with another scientist, and the question that was raised to us is that he has a stack of like 45 to 50 different medical cases where people have experienced a UFO interaction or some anomalous interaction with something and walked away with some type of physical injury where they had to go to an attending physician, get treated. There was in the realm of like lesions and bloody noses, earaches, incredible pain, um, discolored urine. I mean, the whole realm of different symptoms after seeing these crafts that just appeared. So when you start looking at that, you start piecing it together. You say, well, these people can't be making this up because people standing next to them see something. And it's not that they're uniquely seeing it. They're both, many people have seen this, yet they're leaving injuries. So there's some physicality to the location of these high energy crafts, you would say, and it actually impregnates their body with energy that results in some kind of injury.
Okay, that's really interesting. So basically, you started building these sensor suites from input from Hal Puthoff, the
That's correct.
physical
Yeah.
symptom.
Yeah. So he said, if you could capture this, so our bodies are amazing, right? We have such great sensors, but we're terrible at interpreting because our mind just makes things up and it rationalizes. So he says, if you can couple what people are seeing and viewing and all that with actual scientific measurements from actual, in their environment, I mean, that's a data point, that's a reliable scientific point that you can actually build in some kind of a statistical model. So that's what he set us out doing. He says, go build some sensors, put them in people's vicinities when they see these things occur. That's an incredible challenge, but when they see these things, record what's going on, see if if they're getting physically hurt, that means that there's some vector, something coming from the outside affecting them that they then will, your body reacts to, but then the sensors would pick up. So that was that. Are you familiar with Dr. Kit Green? I don't know if you know who he is.
Yes, I know that he looked at Chris Bartel's medical records. He was related to
Yes.
Skinwalker
Yeah.
Ranch, and he did other, yeah, anomalous health effects a little
So
bit.
he was on the team with me. So he's an excellent physician. So it gave us access to a lot of medical files. So that was great. And then what happens is that you start looking at these things, you see patterns. You say, well, these people, go into these states where they almost go catatonic. They see these crafts, they end up being very, very hurt. They end up in the hospital sometimes. And these are the outlier cases that are very, very dangerous. But then you start bringing in other cases that are not so, so dramatic. And you find out there's thousands of these cases where people are actually getting physical changes to their body after seeing this.
I get a lot of comments arguing that I guess the craft or the encounters that harm people is the man-made crafts. That for I guess some reason people don't think that actual UAP or non-man-made events will harm people. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I can't rule out the fact that maybe it's some sinister government or something like that where, some kind of high energy beam is being used, some governmental stuff. I mean, you and I both, have experience with the government. You know that they do a lot of research, there's DARPA and all that stuff. But some of the stuff that you realize, it looks like it's so well beyond our capabilities that it's unfathomable. You can't look at a tic tac and say, well, we made that because it's doing things in space time that just doesn't make sense to us. I mean, you being a pilot knows that there's certain limitations to your body of physical machines. So when we see crap doing these things, these gyrations, and then causing us to have it as we're viewing it from hundreds of feet away, it leads to the fact that it seems it seems out of our capabilities to do these things.
So when you mentioned getting physical evidence, that seemed like that was the impetus of building these sensors and everything was to get actual physical evidence. What have you found? So what is your best physical evidence that you found?
So Hal, like I said, Hal put us on this track to go out and figure this out. So he went back to his sponsor. He had an excellent sponsor that had plenty of financing available for us to do this. This is back in 2017, 2018. So we put together 50 devices that actually could be located within a person's general vicinity, and they, be able to, gather all of the information about their environment. And we ran the study for about 3 years with about 36 people. We gathered maybe probably 2 or 3 thousand instances where they claim to have something happen to them in their environment, and at the same time have an anomalous spike go in one of the days. And I have a whole bunch of examples. If you want, I could share my screen and actually show you some of these examples that we had. So what I'm showing you here is, did it come through yet?
Yep.
Oh, what I'm showing you here is a high level view of some of the data that was captured for our 36 different participants in our study. And again, we ran it for 3 years. We collected probably thousands of these instances where people claim to have an interaction with an anomaly, and at the same time, we have anomalous interactions. Of the 3,000 instances, we only really considered maybe 300 to 400 of them that actually were really good data points. And here is just synopsis of them. I mean, so you can look at so in this little flyout here, this is the narrative people would add into to say, something happened to them, and this might be a spike in the data. So this is a microwave spike. So they claim to have something going on, and within a very short period of time, or within that realm of time, there was this enormous spike in the electromagnetic spectrum. Here is another example where I didn't put, if it's a private kind of, HIPAA type of narrative from these people, I didn't include it. I only included it when they actually gave me permission. So, but they did give me permission to show the waveforms, but some people gave me permission to do both. But this is where, like for this instance, only if people were able to just show the waveform. So, like in this instance, there was this is just regular noise coming from cell phones, microwave ovens, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you had this enormous spike go on in your electromagnetic spectrum. Right at this point, this particular one, the person actually claimed later on in the day that, at this particular time, I felt that, I had this incredible feeling that somebody was watching me, very apprehensive. I got very, very nervous, that type of thing. Now, what's interesting is that, see, people never actually saw the waveforms till probably a week or two later. So they were actually looking at this thing, really just narrating into a an application that just, they would say, "Oh my God, I just went into a catatonic state. I came downstairs and my family said, 'What have you been doing for the past 2 hours?'" And it was like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, I was, basically just sitting in my room, and I woke up 2 hours later only to realize that, something happened to me." And then you go back in the data and you look and you'd find out there's some really big deviations in a lot of the spectrum. So this is microwave. There was a couple other. So this is the acceleration data. So normally things just go cruising across. This particular day, just things started going crazy. People started claiming that, the dogs were barking, things were going a little nuts. So again, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to marry what people are saying that's happening to them, what's happening in the environment. And these are data points that we use to create our particular models. Like, for instance, here's something in the gyroscopic. Gyroscopic is, what the gyroscopic is. If when something energetic enters and leaves your environment, the metric kind of does a wiggle. And gyroscopic is a measurement of the twisting of that of the metric, where the acceleration is really just a push-pull of the change in the metric. So this particular instance, the person claimed that something was happening, and then you look through all the sensors and you find out the gyroscopic sensor had a big spike in I believe it's the y-axis. So, again, this is the kind of thing where you say, well, this normally really can't happen unless something very energetic enters your environment. So, and then you come over here to, like, things like this. You find these very, very high peaks in data, and then of course these correlate to different things. Another radiation deviation from normal, and then here's another radiation deviation. So it's like all these examples of things that are going on these sensors as these people are living their normal lives. And then now what we're doing is we're collecting this thing behind the scenes. People are not really aware that we're actually collecting this because these things are just sitting there with the lights off and they're going through their daily life. They're narrating into the applications. And then later on, we go back and we kind of marry up at the timestamp that they did these things to see that, that there in fact was some deviations in some of their waveforms when they had these experiences.
Okay. And then to, I guess, just play devil's advocate, for all, it seems like all of the paranormal research or any sort of new science, Dean Radin, he's a scientist for
Mhm.
Ionic Institute, and he's done a lot of telepathy experiments. And it seems like his data is unbreachable. It seems to literally prove telepathy. But when you look at why mainstream science hasn't accepted it, they say that there was an issue with the data collection,
Right.
right? That there was some mistakes in how the data was collected. What would be your answer in this case? How were you able to scientifically show that, when they made claims that something was going on at their house, it actually corresponds to these spikes? And then did you also track when they make claims that something's going on, there was no noticeable change in the data? Did you keep track of all those things? How do you answer this question?
Right. So, I mean, it's obvious that what you want to do is you want to get a correlation between the two of them. So there are cases, lots of, we had thousands of these cases where you would have a spike in the data, but nothing came from the person. And then vice versa, you would have a narrative from a person and nothing happened in you couldn't match it up. So we came up with a metric that said that within some window, they have to occur in this order. So that's basically what we had to do. That whole metric is, and only when that happens, we can actually call that a good data point. Now, to your point, is actually quite interesting. I think that one of the things that we realized in the beginning is that 35 people or 35 participants was not a significant enough number. We got to a what they call a sigma, which is the ability to repeat the experiment with the same kind of accuracy of only like 4.3 or something like that, which is pretty low. We were shooting for much higher. So as that particular study wound down, we said to ourselves, the next step in this thing, if we ever go to a phase two, was to actually increase the number significantly from 35 to maybe up to, we kind of came up with a number of 10,000, where we said if we have 10,000 participants, now that number becomes significant. And the whole idea is not to just have all this neat data. The idea is to publish a 5 sigma paper where you can come to the table and put it to like a Nature or some high level publication where the reviewers would not be able to refute this thing by claiming anything. So being very particular on how you actually set up the statistics is extremely important. You have to have the numbers, you have to have the number of participants high enough and the data collection high enough.
Yeah, from my statistics classes, you need at least 30 at least runs or data points to even apply any sort of statistical analysis. So yeah, if you only have 35, you're right on the border there if you have any issues with any of the data collection at all. Um, but even Dean Radin, he had over 5 sigma on several of his experiments, and they still don't accept it. They say there's just an issue with the actual experiment itself.
It's tough. It's tough. You have to go out there with your best shot, and basically you have to get to the point where you have you basically separate your sensors, right? So the sensors have to be completely separated. It's like, for instance, we don't let the people see their data. The data is just captured in the background. They never really know what the data is till well in the past or well in the future, actually. But they're allowed to, enter their narratives, and we use natural language processing to pull out the pertinent information that they're telling us and use that for our data points. So when you actually couple those two things together, now what you're doing is, and you do it over 10,000. So 10,000 people on a daily basis, that's 10,000 data points a day. You're looking to gather a whole lot more than just the 500 that we pulled out of this thing. So if I went to publish with the paper, with the data that we had from the first go around, the first phase of this study, I mean, that would never be accepted. This is really just an indication that there is something there to further investigate. But now the second one, which is the one that's actually going on right now, where we're trying to get 10,000 people on this study, that's when we're going to go out to the world and say, look, we've gathered this data with 10,000 people. We've had, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of different instances where people have claimed things, and we have, true measurements from scientific instruments, and then that's what we're going to go to publish with. And that's the goal of the whole study.
Wow, so that's going on right now, you said.
Yeah.
So you're
So
taking data
actually,
right now?
yeah. So we're collecting. So for 3 years, we collected from 35 people, and we gathered, like I said, like 400 to 500 different instances where we can use in our statistical model. So since then, we fired up a new one. I've got some funding. So actually came Hal had his sponsor, which was an amazing person. But that sponsor, stopped funding him. So uh, when I announced, in fact, the person that was there was a person that was in the first study that had basically a life-changing experience, because they felt that for years they had this situation in their household where they had all this unexplained stuff. They were seeing things, they had orbs going through their bedroom, they had all these crazy things happening. People were getting sick. They didn't understand it. When they joined the study, what happened is that because of what the data was showing them, and the reassurance they had, the physicality that it actually created, they actually felt a lot better, and they were able to rationalize it and actually not actually make it go away, but I mean, human beings can get used to anything if you know it is not a sinister thing. So they actually felt much better and able to rationalize it and understand it, and started to research a little bit. And instead of turning it into a being scared about it, they turned it into like a little science experiment they did in their house. Subsequently, when I had shut down that about a year ago, I had shut down that study because we had collected all we wanted to, and they came back to me and said, can we continue? Is there any way we can continue? I said, well, we're shutting it down, but well, I'll let you know if we're going to do anything in the future. So sure enough, now what, 6 months later, or 6 months ago, when I fired up the second part of the study, which is now had all new metrics, had all new goals in mind. They contacted me and says, what can I do to help you? And I laid the whole thing out. And I said the way to do this right is to have at least 10,000 people throughout the world, not just located in one little area, throughout the world. So it was very spread out. And they said that we're willing to pay for any hardware that has to be manufactured to send out to these people. So now I've got this sponsor
Wow.
who is, amazing person. I mean, to begin with, the whole family is willing to pay for the devices to go out, get out to 10,000 people.
Wow. And these aren't cheap from what I understand. These are like
No, because we
high
used,
tech.
we could use cheap sensors, but we went to like Siemens and got their best IMU. We went to, all of Texas Instrument and got their best environmental sensors. So we made sure we had the best sensors in there and the highest computational capabilities within the device because we wanted to get the best fidelity possible. So yeah, it's not cheap. But they signed up. They said we'll do 10,000 if you can get 10,000 people and get the data and get it published, then that's all they wanted.
Okay, that's really interesting. So your first study, and I've read the results from that. You had that up on your MooPass website, I believe.
Yep.
So I've read through those results as well. So you basically had someone in that first study, an experiencer, I'm assuming at this point, who had all these effects, and they believed things were going on with them, but of course, in our modern science, nothing's going on, right? It's just in their brain. So essentially, the people are crazy. Is
That's
the
right. That's how
general assumption from science is that the people are crazy. All these experiencers are crazy, and so this person or family that took part in your first study, this gave them some proof, right? Validation, I guess, in their brains
validation.
that they
That's the right
weren't
word.
crazy. Actually, there is something physically going on. So for them, it was proof enough to where they're going to invest, it sounds like hundreds of thousands of dollars at least to support this study.
Yeah. So what they felt is that it changed their life so dramatically. They felt that they wanted to help me have all sorts of people get to the point where all these experiencers that have all these intrepidations and problems with their life to actually help them. So although they were interested in the scientific part of it, they were also very interested in the humanity part of it. They said, we really want to help people, but if you can publish a paper to wake up the scientific community, then that would be, that's like a complete win for them.
Okay, I see. So they gain such a benefit from it in their lives that they feel it's kind of a twofold that
That's right.
they could help many other people the same way that they felt that they gained that benefit
Mhm.
through this. And also, like you said, wake up the scientific community. If you can do a hard-hitting, well-done experiment, it'll be very difficult for them to just write it off.
Right. And one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm gathering my scientific panel, Hal Puthoff and Gary Nolan and those kind of guys to actually be part of the preparation of the paper and the collection of the data, making sure everything is completely perfect. So when we do go to publish, the reviewers are not going to be able to kick it down because it's going to be like just right there. Of course, there's always going to be that political aspect of it and all that kind of stuff, but at least we have the knowledge that the numbers are there and the data is there.
I had a crazy thought, and I'm sure my audience will not like it, but I just thought if you considered bringing on like a debunker, even like Mick West, he's like the lead of the debunkers. If you brought someone like him on, a noted skeptic, has that worked in the past or does it backfire? Do you think that would be beneficial to add more credibility to the study?
Well, that's a good question. So I was just recently on a show and on National Geographic. It was Leslie Kean's show. Anyway, so the interviewers, the director that actually interviewed me asked me that question. He said, "Well, what do you think about all the debunkers?" And I said, "They are as important as the other side because you can't have one side just like all like gung ho, go forward. Everything is exactly how we think it is because you could be wrong.
Yep.
That's the problem with science, right? People get like so pinholed into the way that they're thinking, they don't realize that they might be wrong and there might be another answer. Don't think you have the only answer. So I think that that side is always as important as the other side. That's why we have Republican Democrats, right? It pulls both ways, back and forth, back and forth. So you need to have the people that are pulling science in one direction, but the people that are saying, well, wait a minute, could it be this thing? So, that actually is part of what we're doing. What I'm trying to do is I want people to actually look at this thing and say what's wrong with it, poke holes in it, and things like that, because that's super important.
So some researchers suggest UAPs can manipulate electromagnetic fields or use the quantum world gets thrown around a lot, quantum effects,
Sure.
etc. But your sensors have detected anomalies in what fields? What do you think this relies in? You mentioned gyroscopes, but that's like gravity, isn't it? So, where do
Yeah.
you find the most compelling data, I guess, across which spectrums?
So actually, that's interesting. So I looked at, so right now we're looking at anything that could get perturbed by something high energetic in your environment. So your IMU, which is your acceleration, your magnetic vector, your gyroscope. I mean, all the things that are the motion sensors, right? And then there's the other thing. It's like the pressure, the air pressure. Another thing that people don't realize, the number of GPS satellites your phone can get to. When something high energy comes in your environment, the GPS sensors in your phones are so sensitive and so weak, their antennas, that anything could perturb it, right? So we look for drops in the number of satellites. So when the satellites drop from like 12 to 2 and they come back up again, we know something's funny going on. So that's a big indicator that we find is a number of satellites. We look for electromagnetic. We also look for gamma because gamma actually happens to be something that when you get something high energy in the environment, you start seeing a lot of spurious radiation happening or decays happening in, say, your radon and things like that. So again, you're looking at like the acceleration vectors, the magnetic vectors, your environmental vectors, which is your air pressures. Oh, air pressure is another one. So when you have a changing metric, your air is going to fluctuate a lot. We can pick that up by looking at the pressures to see that, if something high energy is flowing by, you get this incredible, your air is actually being moved at the same time, meaning your local air. So the pressure changes a little bit. We also look at like, in fact, if you want, I can actually show you. So for instance, is one of the portals that people look at their data, so this is my data, so I see it in real time. So for basically, what you can see is like the environmental. You get the pressure, humidity. Pressure is a big one. That's a really good one. You get your IMU, which is your inertial measurement unit, and that's acceleration, magnometer, gyroscope. And then you get your electromagnetic radiation, Geiger counters, radiation, gamma radiation, maybe microwave energy and microwave spectrum. And I'll show you all these. And then you get your surroundings, which is your infrasound, your sound vector, your Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi has a big effect when things are energetic in your area. Wi-Fi drops off. So we look at all of these and we look at all of these sensors to see if there's any variations when somebody reports something. So for instance, this is let me get it current. So this is our pressure vector right now. So right now the pressure's going up, the sun's out, so the pressure's going up. But every once in a while you'll see a spike here that might say that there's something going on.
When you mention pressure, couldn't it be like someone opened the door or
Could
or
be. Yeah,
slammed
so
it or
air moves
something?
around. Yep. Yep. Definitely air moves around, so you never really know. But what you try to do is you try to couple that with other things. So maybe at that point, so if you come over here and you look at the electromagnetic vector and you look at maybe there's a spike when again, we have AI models looking at this thing. I don't physically see anything. So there might be electromagnetic spike here, and there might be something here. So we look to get at least 3 or 4 different channels all spiking at the same time. So if it was somebody opening and closing the door, well, that would just be one channel, maybe the noise channel and maybe that, but it wouldn't do an electromagnetic noise. It wouldn't, it wouldn't have any other type of thing. So yeah, so you need to have multiple sensors fire off at one time. And that was actually part of the first study. We had a rule that we had to have consistency, some type of what they call variations or perturbations, they say, in multiple sensors within a certain time frame of actually somebody claiming that something was going on. And then I can look at some of the real-time stuff. So some of the real-time actual, like for instance, like infrasound, which is this is the low frequency stuff that actually happens when things are moving, the P waves that propagate through the surface of the Earth. Then you have your magnetic vectors that, could be fooling around. So this is real time, actually. This is happening right now. And then also what we have is the electromagnetic spectrum. So we look at the magnetic spectrum or electromagnetic spectrum in real time, and we actually store that and look to see if there's any variations that are like out of the ordinary in any one of the frequencies, and we start logging that. So if we go back to this and actually look at, say, our spectrum over a period of time, we can start looking at, this is over time, this is what's happening to the electromagnetic spectrum.
Hmm.
So as maybe somebody was so like 1.6 is a little bit high, but some of the stuff is some of the stuff is FM. Um, this is what we look for is large deviations in the electromagnetic spectrum that occur, some big spike. There's nothing here right now, but we'll find a big peak in one of the frequencies or overall a large number of frequencies. Again, that's what the AI engine is looking at. So it's looking at the spectrum. It's looking at, like, say, for instance, the camera. So if I go to here, it's actually gathering camera data. So to see if any anomalies in the infrared spectrum are occurring. So it's looking at that. So
Hmm.
it's pulling out all this data. So there's so much data getting put into this thing. And at the same time, people are telling us the narratives of, what they're seeing, what they're feeling. And then we're marrying those to any large deviations. So obviously there's not much going on here, but when people have these experiences, you get these large spikes in the data, and that's what we're looking for.
I've heard a lot about Schumann resonances, and it happens to be along the same, uh, basic frequency as the human brain, or within uh, the same general alpha brain state, if you will. Can you pick up Schumann resonance frequencies?
Well, that's the actually interesting thing. So this system, and actually show you a picture of it's a small little device that sits on your, actually it looked like this. Where can I show you? So, oh, sorry. So these are the devices. So this device right here is what's actually being collected. You can plug into the back of these things any number of devices, like like that helmet, the bio helmet and things like that, any kind of thing, and it's designed basically to bring in whatever data that is available to it. So it could, if you wanted to plug in that type of sensor, it can definitely log that, and then you can look at it on the portal, and then the AI engine would say, "Oh, wait a minute, I got some new data." And it'll record it for a little while, maybe a week, and see what norm is. And then after a little while, it'll actually start saying, "Oh, wait a minute, I got an anomaly here. This is something I haven't seen before."
Hmm. So you can put in basically any sensor, sounds like.
Yeah, so I've got two different ports in the back. One of the ports is USB, so anything like, in fact, like we wanted to start thinking about no, sorry, quantum random number generators and squids and all those kind of things that are measuring the quantum space. And then at the same time, biological sensors. So we've got a watch that has a biological sensor that we can actually look at tremors and heart rate and blood pressures and things like that to understand if something going on there.
Okay, but I think Schumann resonances there, it's like 7.6 hertz. So I think that is infrasound, right? I think infrasound
That is,
sensors
yeah,
could be.
infrasound is below 20.
So I
So we
think
are picking that up, but we're not picking that up locally in the brain. So you might want to say, what's going on in the brain, like having a sensor like right on your head or something like that.
I see. So if you that could pick up like a EEG type signal.
Exactly. Yeah.
So does anyone in your first study, did they wear any sort of EEG like helmets or anything?
No, we kind of said we were relying on their narratives to be interpretations of what's going on in their bodies and then use the external sensors. So we never got to that point, but that's when we kind of evolved the system to say, look, we're gonna expand this a little bit and start using a little bit more sophisticated equipment and allow for building out different types of sensors.
It seems like a key point of this is when they actually self-report. Is it through an app or something? Do they put in, okay, I felt
So
something
there's a
there, and
cell
then
phone
it's
app. Yeah, so actually there's a cell phone app. So there's a thing here where you can actually enter your narratives here. Do a very nice thing. But also what the most convenient one, so this is in the portal. So this is what people use to look at their data and stuff like that. They can just go over here and just add some things, or they can come over here. Oops, wrong one. I'm sorry. They can come over here and add any kind of incident report. Like they come over here and they can actually type in some observation or something like that, and that's the narrative. So they can go to the graph and say, look, during this period of time I was doing this. But the important one is the phone app that they have that's associated with this.
yep.
We call it the Portal Buddy. So they can actually just like click one button, narrate, turn it off, and go away. It's meant for really, really quick additions of their narratives.
So that seems, yeah, really interesting. So they can self-report the app and then
Right.
they don't see the data. Actually, they don't even see the data until a week later. And on, I guess the first study, they didn't see the data at all. Is that what I
I didn't
understand?
see it for, yeah, we did 2 weeks.
Oh, okay, 2 weeks.
But we felt that that's a little far away because people would call up and say, whatever happened. So I got kind of tired of
Yeah.
constantly doing that. So I said, okay, you guys can see it. And I'm actually thinking about it, and I don't know maybe you can weigh in on this. Is I think 2 or 3 days is enough.
Yeah. I
I
think as
don't
long
think
as
it
they
has to
can't,
be a week.
or if they go back and add in, like you said, they add in narration after, as long as that's annotated. I think the real key data point will be they can't access the data for at least not real time. Has to be like 3 days, I think is plenty. But it's annotated that they didn't know the data before, and then they couldn't see
Right.
it for 3 days.
Right. So what I was worried about is that they're looking at the electromagnetic spectrum. They're saying, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
now I'm having a vision
Yeah,
because of the
exactly.
spike." That's what I was avoiding. So I think 3 days is enough. And
I agree. As long as it's clearly delineated in the data that this was, when this was put in, when they actually added the narration in the app.
right.
That seems amazing. I mean, is that how it went on the first study? Did the first study do that as well?
To do what? What was
Where they actually put in the data I guess you probably didn't have an app then. How did they enter their narration in the
same
first
way,
study?
same way, same exact way.
Same
It was a
way.
little bit more. It was a little bit more rudimentary. Now it's a little bit more advanced because it's so many people. It was very personal. The first one, the people actually. I talk to them constantly. So these people, I'm not going to talk to 10,000 people. So this has to be a little bit more sensitive to the general public now. So now it's a full app and it's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of ways that the mainstream scientific community can get out of it. Because it seems like they always have some idea that this wasn't done correctly, but it seems like if you have it all open source, your data is all open source, obviously not their names
Yeah.
and addresses, etc. But if you have it all validated, and if they did need to see the data, you could at least show them in a confidential manner that no, actually we do
Right.
have all these people validated. Um,
So are you familiar with natural language processing, the AI side of things? So like Facebook uses it, Google uses it. Every time that you I don't know if you've got any of those devices at home, like Alexas or anything
Yeah,
like
of
that.
course. Yeah. Yep.
I think everybody does.
Yep.
So basically, what they're doing is that they're getting your information and they're stripping out the pertinent data. And that's what we're using. We're using the same tools they use to actually, when somebody gives a narrative, like they'll give like a literally 1,000 word narrative. And we start pulling out sentiment and were they scared? Were they frightened? Is this genuine? Is this a past? Is it present? So you can pull out all this information. What are the key words? Was it UFO? Was it an apparition? Was it? And then you start building up these vectors, what they call them. It's basically just a line of numbers that represent what that person. So you break that entire narrative down to a vector of maybe 1,000 digits, or not 1,000 digit, 1,000 numbers. And that's the data point for that narrative. Then you go back to the actual time series data coming from the sensors, and then you overlay those things at that time stamp, and you start seeing the patterns of, okay, when they said this is up, this was starting to go up. And actually, it's all temporal based too. It's not exactly at the thing. So it starts ramping up. So what we noticed in the first study is that people started reporting certain things at certain times, and then they start ramping up, and then you would get the cascade, and then you would get the big experience. But there's always a lead in time, and then it would like a fall, like an exponential fall off, where all of a sudden everything goes back to normal after a period of time. So it was never like bam, it was all done. It was always lead up, lead up, lead up. So we don't look for just that one instance. We look for lead ups into that. So they start reporting that, they're not feeling good. The dog was barking, the kids were acting up, blah, 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 as the week goes by. And then all of a sudden it ramps up and they have a full-blown experience.
Wow. This sounds really exciting, Jim. How many people do you have now? How long is the study going to take, do you think, before you have really
So
hard data?
yeah, we just got our funding in December. Prior to that, the study was open, but really just people had to actually pay for the units. And we had like 200 people actually end up signing up, and Carl was very, very helpful in doing that. So we had 200 people.
Oh,
So when this person came in, of course the numbers got blown out, right? They said 10, I said 10,000. So the meager number that I had was great, but it wasn't even close to what we needed. So that's actually since December. Actually, we launched it in January. Since then, we've been signing up like 2 or 3 people a day. So and then I just to let you know that, so these people were the sponsor that came up were so gung ho. They said, let's do the 10,000. I said, well, wait a minute. You know,
wow.
that's a lot to chew. So
Yeah.
I convinced them to do 500 initially and then revisit. I said I could probably do 500 in 6 months. And the way we're going, we're going to blow that away. But we said after we do 500, let's revisit and start thinking about the next steps, maybe 1,000 after that, and stuff like that. But, we expect within 6 months to be well within the 500. I mean, I expect to get there a lot sooner, but it's just like every day, it's like more and more people are signing up constantly because they don't have to pay for it, basically.
Yeah.
So, but they have to take a survey, a short survey. They have to, and then we prime the AI pump with their survey answers. So we get their particular model kind of primed with what type of person, what's their experiences, what kind of medical, that kind of stuff.
Wow. And do they have to pay a monthly service fee, you said, I think?
Yeah, so there's a service fee. Unfortunately, the amount of money it costs to have them send their data from their devices and all this stuff up to the cloud in HIPAA. HIPAA is what we use to protect their data, right? So
Yep.
once it gets up in the cloud, Amazon, not Amazon, Microsoft makes sure nobody, because I use Azure, which is the Microsoft cloud resource, make sure nobody can possibly ever get to that. So, but it's expensive, extremely expensive. So it costs around $2,500 or $2,400 per 200 people.
Hmm.
So 200 participants requires about $2,500 worth of cloud resources per month.
Yep.
So I asked them to, so what I did is I said, okay, let's do 20. and then I'll pay for the processing. But if they interact and they actually put their narratives in on a regular basis every day, like every day, then I'll start giving them that $20 back. So it's an incentive because if you know what I found in the first one, if you don't ask them for anything, it's completely free. They put it in the corner and they forget about it, and nothing ever happens.
Yeah, they're not
So
involved.
this is a way for them to you pay I mean that $20 is not a lot of money to be part of this and but you know it pays for their processing and then they get that back
Okay, if they actually
if they
are
interact.
involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you won't get any data because you definitely need them, right? Because spikes without a narration beforehand doesn't give you any actual data or
Doesn't
any
give you
usable
anything.
data.
And you know and I know there's a lot of people out there putting sensors and putting you know cameras and all this stuff, but that's all it is. It's just one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is what's going on with the people.
Yeah, arguably the most important side of the equation.
Oh, absolutely the most important side. So but getting the scientific data to corroborate with their experiences is what's really going to make this a real scientific paper.
Wow, yeah, that seems really interesting. They sign up at your website. I'll put a link in the description.
Yeah, Carl's or my so there's Carl has a study. There's a couple other people that have signed up. Actually, we're going to have one over in Norway where people in that area can sign up and get a device. And I would love to have. I know you've been there, and I'm going
Yep.
there actually. I think in September, maybe. I don't know if you want to make the trip over there again, but
Okay.
I would like to see there's so much rich data to be collected in that area that it's not just on the mountain or in the valley. I think it's the people in the area that need to be instrumented. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think that's what they think for sure. I
Oh,
think
okay,
I
that's
think
great.
any long-term experiencer that's been the main argument is that I think they would love to have data, like you said. I think
Yeah.
anything that can validate their experience, anything that can tell them they're not crazy, A, and then B, not only that, but you're going to get usable data. I think, yeah, definitely. I talked to several people there that would be excited about it.
Yeah, so we're working with them to get them fired up with that. So yeah, so in fact, I can give you the link if you want. So I basically talk about what the study is. I tell them about all the stuff that's going on with the study, and then they can go to the sign up sheet, which is over here. So what I do is one of the things I do is I ask for $30 initially before, and then they take the survey, they sign up, they get their device, blah, blah, blah. Then I give them the $30 back. The $30 is there, so nobody comes in and just say, I'm just gonna get one. What the hell? I'm gonna. So it's the tire, the tire kickers. It's just to weed out and get the serious people. So I get that right. I get that back right
Nice.
away.
Because these aren't cheap, right? I mean, you're talking $500 sensors,
Yeah.
etc.
So it's well, if you wanted to, yeah. So they're 420,
Hmm.
and it's not a lot of added to that. So it's to compensate that. What I don't want the sponsor to think that I'm just giving his money away.
Yeah.
So we ask for the $30. So we get genuine people. They take the survey. We look at it. We make sure everything is cool. We ship them on a device, and then we give them the $30 back after that.
Okay, cool. You give it
So
back.
again, genuine people, not genuine people, genuine experiencers that have really good content to add. So
Well,
that's
I
what we're
think you
looking
really
for.
need dedicated people. You need motivated, dedicated people to actually put in the data,
Yeah,
day in and day out over a long time. You could have a great intention. Okay, yeah, I'm going to do this. That sounds like a great idea. But then to actually do it and to go through, I think it makes sense where you're incentivizing them by paying, giving that $20 back if they put in a certain amount
yeah,
of inputs, even if it's just nothing, right? Because if they say, yeah, I felt normal today or I felt no issues, that's
anything.
great data point.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, along those lines, so I hope people understand that this is not a sinister thing. People actually end up having experiences that they feel really good about. They walk away from these things good. They feel good. It's more like a meditation thing or something. I don't, I myself am not an experiencer, but I talk to hundreds of them. But a lot of the times, it is a positive thing, not necessarily negative.
So a lot of the times, is that more often than not, or
It's yeah, more than 50%. It depends on the situation that they're in. If they're in a situation where other parts of their life are going well, it seems to bleed into that or amplify those things. But if again, that's what the data is going to collect. That's their narratives are going to talk about, and that's what we're going to be pulling out. Is what's going on with the rest of their lives when this is happening. So those are the kind of things that actually end up being part of the survey. Actually talks about that, and then the actual data that we're collecting, the narratives that we're collecting, actually talk about that.
and where do you recommend people put the sensors? Do they put it like under their bed or, in the kitchen?
Yeah. So well, this is the watch that they get,
Uh,
and they obviously wear that. So the device, I don't have the device right here with me, but the device usually ends up being where, like in their family room or in their kitchen, where they spend the most time, they have the most interactions with their family, or in a study in an office where they do their meditations and they're alone and they're focusing or whatever. That's the kind of thing that people are all different.
so you could even use it maybe the other way, where say someone has a deep meditation and they have some profound meditative experience. Where I've been meditating most of the time, nothing happens, but there's been a few times where I don't know, I really felt like I had some sort of very interesting, profound kind of experience, at least in my own mind. It would be interesting then a few days later to go back and look at the data and see like, was there anything different there, or, you know, what's could it have been caused, by something in the environment, or could I have caused it mentally? Just interesting
Yeah.
data points.
Well, that's an interesting thing. So there's a lot of people that ask me, does it's our brains creating that? In fact, Ross Cohart actually asked me that question. Well, I just did a News Nation interview with him, and he said, can you summon UFOs? Can you summon these things? And as an engineer, and I know you're an engineer, we're taught that, there's sources and sinks, right? People either can receive or they can transmit. So I said, wait a minute. Yeah, why can't we transmit? Why can't we how do we know what our brains are capable of doing? So much energy is used in our brain. It's very possible that we can create a lot of these waveforms and communicate out to whatever this phenomena is.
Yeah, that's interesting because Jake Barber, who came out recently, his team, when they actually videoed them, like you mentioned, possibly summoning these craft or allegedly summoning, they were wearing a device. I think
Right.
it was they were wearing a Muse type device, some sort of EEG monitor, and I looked into it afterwards, asked my buddy Reuven Levitt. He's actually been on the show. He's a longtime meditator, and I'm curious if you could actually use these MUPAS systems as sort of like a more wide spectrum Muse type device where you're actually getting data about your environment. Maybe not necessarily your EEG like you mentioned, but in the future, possibly you could even integrate one of these Muse type systems into the MUPAS system.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's designed for expandability because when I did the second round, I said I have no idea. I know what sensors really work well, but I don't know if I'm getting all the right sensors. In 100 years from now, we might say, "Oh yeah, if you had this one sensor, you would have solved the entire problem in one shot." But we don't know what that is yet. We're not smart enough to know what that is yet. So I said, let's make it expandable. So as we get clever ideas and we will want to venture out and try different things, we'll just plug it in and see what happens.
I, I think Carl mentioned you actually have a clearance with the government, et cetera. You've at
I
least
have
been involved
yeah,
in some
I
high
have
level.
TS. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I have TS clearance. Yeah,
Oh, you do. So you have a top secret clearance. That's
yeah,
amazing. So you've obviously been involved in high level research projects In,
We do, yeah. We do some Spark stuff. We do DARPA stuff, yeah. Am I not as this? So I have a regular job that I go
okay.
to.
Okay,
Um,
so it's not necessarily top secret
Not
related
connected to
to
this at all.
consciousness
No,
studies.
no. So there's a lot of things that I do with the military, the Army Corps of Engineers, stuff like that.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
In your opinion, though, how much do you think of this information is classified? How much do you think we know about UAPs remains classified?
So I think Ross just asked me that question. But the answer that I'll give you that because I know that you've had clearances in the past and you know. So I've gone with so a lot of the intelligent communities relies on the scientific community for help understanding what the threats are. So they go to guys like Hal Puthoff, which is a renowned scientist. He knows a lot of information, and they bring him to Washington. They sit him down in front of all these people, and they ask him questions and weigh in on certain things. And I've gone with them on a lot of these things.
Oh, cool.
And you look at these people's faces. I mean, these are professional intelligence officers, and you look at their faces when you tell them things, and you see surprise on their face, and you start saying, "Wait a minute, why are you surprised? You're supposed to know everything." But it's not true. They don't know everything. And these intelligence guys, you say, well, it's compartmentalized. You got people that really don't know everything. But I would argue that these people, I mean, this is the Senate Armed Service Committee, and there's you know, like DIA and all those guys. I'll bet you they know a lot of what's going on. And to see them surprised when you tell them things that you've learned about the phenomena and UAPs and all this is like sometimes reassuring and sometimes like disconcerting.
And I guess some researchers claim that UAPs respond to human consciousness and intent. Have you seen data in that manner? Have you seen any actual specific data that or personal experiences that support that idea that, UAPs interact with human thought in a measurable way?
So one of the interesting things, so these narratives that people talk about, that they come in there, and one of the things that we look for is that how do you feel this interact? How do you feel about the interaction? What do you think? So there's some of them, and you can ask the natural language processing uh, models, the AI models, are these people genuine? Are they in control? What is their sentiment during this whole thing? And sometimes it feels like they're actually controlling the conversation. So when or the interaction. So when they do see a UAP, these people feel like they're actually in a little bit of control. I mean, not a one, not 100%, but it gives you a number like between 0 and 100. Some of these people actually feel like they're not just communicating with this or working with this thing; they're actually like moving it or talking to it or doing something to it.
So that's interesting. That reminds me of the psychics team that Jake Barber's putting together. They were saying that they can basically fly the craft or, entice them to land, if you will. And then they can go capture it. So people ask, why did they crash? And one argument could be is they're not crashing. We're either shooting them down or doing some sort of controlling operation where actually you can convince them to land or actually operate the UAPs to actually get them to land. Is that what you're
It,
implying? Or
it's possible. It's possible. So I saw a little bit of data that says that these people felt that they had some control over it.
okay, that's really interesting. So you mentioned there as well that maybe we'll learn the one sensor, that will prove this without a doubt. How do you see the next 5 years or the next 3 to 5 years? Well, what will be the major breakthrough? Do you think MUPAS will give the data breakthrough that would convince science that this is real?
I think it will. The goal of it is to do that, is to actually come up with that and try different sensors and things like that. My thoughts is that we when you talk about classical type of things, a classical means like, stuff that we could measure with rulers and things like that, the electromagnetic, the gravity and things like that. I feel a lot of what's going on with this phenomena is in the quantum realm. So I think that we're going to find out in a couple of years from now that most of the sensors really are going to start pinging in the quantum realm.
How do you measure, I guess, things in the quantum realm?
Well, it's it. Random number generators, quantum random number generators, and putting things, just basically trying to entangle things. So when I was with at Hal's lab, we were actually entangling biological entities across very, very vast distances. I don't know. Have you ever heard of the Baxter effect?
No.
Baxter was he wasn't even a scientist. He was a CIA guy who did polygraphs. And at one point he polygraphed his yucca plant. And what he found out is that he was in the other room and he had an experience, something happened to him, and the polygraph on his yucca plant went off. And he said, wait a minute, that's weird.
Wow.
So he then said, is that a coincidence? So he started this whole investigation, took about 10, 15 years, where he started instrumenting, trying different experiments, seeing that his yucca plant was actually linked to him. He didn't know the vehicle, he didn't know what was a link, but he felt that he linked the two of them, there was a biological link between the two. It wasn't, and he put him in Faraday, the Faraday cages, right? It's
Yep.
complete isolation from any outside electromagnetic energy or things like that. He did all sorts of stuff like that. I did the same experiment at House, where at Health Institute, where we took we actually had neurons from a um, from a mouse and grew them up separately, or actually grew them together, separated them into two different colonies, and saw that over through Faraday cages, they were actually communicating with each other. So it's very possible that there is a connection. This is a very rudimentary experiment. I mean, it wasn't, we had action potential that actually started lining up. So in a bigger space, like our brains with other people's brains or another species brains, or, they have some kind of electrical impulses that control their thought patterns that we can actually connect with them
Hmm. I see. So the word quantum gets thrown around a lot.
a
But
lot.
what I understand is you're talking about the microscopic or even sub-microscopic realm that we don't fully understand yet, but we're able to realize that there's some sort of connection between, like you said, his yucca plant. That's amazing. You put a yucca plant in a Faraday cage
That's right. And then and he put a polygraph on it.
and a polygraph on a yucca plant.
You
Yeah,
should. It's a book that you
unbelievable.
can get on Amazon. It's Baxter Effect. It's actually
Okay.
the guy unfortunately passed away just recently, but sparked a lot of research.
Yeah,
But the whole idea is that
Dean Radin's done that as well. I believe with the Gansfeld experiments, he's done
yes,
remote viewing
yeah,
experiments
yep,
and putting people in a Faraday cage. They had a Faraday cage at Ions
yes,
and found this as well, which is just mind blowing to me. That alone should prove that there's some sort of connection, right? If you
right.
put something in a Faraday cage, it's completely isolated electromagnetically, then how does our science explain that? It seems like they just ignore it.
So it was actually an interesting case if you have a little bit more time. So of the 36 people, it was fairly spread out. Some in DC, some at West Coast, some in East Coast. Some in the Utah area, or in the middle of the country. But it turned out that there was two or three people that started to communicate with each other that were in our study. And it looked like, and it was proven that their waveforms started to link and kind of correlate. So when they were having experience, so they talked maybe once or twice a month or something like that. But it looked like on a day-to-day basis, they were having very similar experiences, and their data and their sensors started to correlate. So, you can do a cross correlation between time series and actually find out that there is some crazy correlations that you could never see with your naked eye. So if you cross correlate a lot of these things, you find out at that timestamp, there is some correlations with these anomalous events. So on maybe a
Wow.
1,000 miles separation between two different people that never met, there was correlations between their data just by communicating maybe once a week or things like that. Now, that's just a few data points. What we hope to do in the next studies, now we have thousands of people, is to actually see if we can get people to actually get this linking to the point where we can get some really, really good statistics. And that being part of our scientific paper would be like, we linked people without them ever having met through, physically met.
But they communicated. That reminds me of Rupert Sheldrake. He's done the telephone experiments. I don't know if you've seen that. He
Yeah.
did them many years ago. You should check it out. Yeah, it's the telephone experiments. Basically, you get the feeling that you get a thought of someone, maybe a friend or family member. You haven't heard from them in a while, and then they call you shortly after that. I'm sure you had that
Yes.
experience?
I've heard that so many times. Yes.
Yeah, well, and so I didn't know this till recently, but Rupert Sheldrake, the UK, um, he invented the morphic field. He's written several books. Yeah, he actually did several experiments on this, and again, I think proved statistically that there is an effect there where people can actually get some sort of information across vast distances. Usually
Yep.
they're connected with those people. It's like family or friends. But
Right.
he's done several tests. I think it was like well over 25% hit rates when he did it. And but again, I that was years ago. I think decades ago. He's already done
Oh,
it,
that's
but
interesting.
science
I
just
didn't
doesn't
know any of
look.
that. Yeah. So the theory goes that for people to get quantumly entangled, they actually have to be within a certain space in order for you know, their their waveforms to actually interact and become entangled. But I don't, it looks like that's not the case. There's other ways to entangle.
But I guess, do they have to communicate? Well, I guess you'll find that data out. At least
We're
these
going to
people
find that
you
data out. I mean, that's part of the whole study is that we're going to have breakouts where we say, this group of people, let's go influence these group of people. So I would say, in fact, one of the Dean Radin experiments that he invented was the kind of thing that you can have two dispersed people, separated and see if you can one person can intent on the other one and change their particular waveforms and things like that. So
huh.
we're going to try that. We're going to have two different people and then what we'll do is we'll do a completely blind. We'll have 1,000 people um, given names, or I'm sorry, given like maybe not just a number, and then they would have to intent on those numbers, and we can see will those people that we identified as those numbers, and of course they don't know about it, um, is there are they changing? Are they having more experiences? Is their data changing and things like that? I mean, how can a scientific journal um, refute that kind of thing where you have all this information? It's like I think
They
they're going
just
to have to
say
put some
the
limits.
experiment was done incorrectly. The data was corrupted. That everything I say, because I went to review, like, what about Rupert Sheldrake? I think he videoed the actual experiments happening, but it's amazing what people will not even look at. But
Yeah.
if you have that many people, I mean, even 500 people to me seems like it should be a viable experiment. I don't even
I
think you
think
would
yeah,
need 10,000.
I think critical mass is going to be 500, but 10,000 will get us up to the five and past five sigma. Dean actually said six. There was an experiment that he said six on. That was the problem because he claimed six.
Well,
Six is like Higgs boson.
yeah,
I mean,
which
that is insane. We have billions of data points. He didn't have that. So that's why I said that I need to have 10,000 participants all creating. So I'm looking at getting millions of data points. That's what I'm looking for. And that's to get to five sigma.
just to get to five.
Yeah.
Man, I'm super stoked for this
Yeah,
experiment.
Six Sigma, it's like you need the entire population of the world. So I don't think that's going to be possible. But you never know.
So Jim, in your years of studying this, you've been back in the day next to Hal Puthoff in his lab in Austin. You've been on Skinwalker Ranch. So what do you think it means to be human? What have you learned about this consciousness that we're all going this experiment that we're all living through right now? What have you learned overall?
So what my feelings about being human? You know, I hear a lot of people talk about that we're in a simulation. I mean, the more AI comes up and the more, people are getting sophisticated with that, we could be, this could just be, we could be avatars or whatever. I don't know. I'd hate to think that it is just a simulation that, we're just basically in a game. I don't know. You know, I like to I'd like to think that, our bodies, our physical bodies are actually real and our consciousness is a bunch of information. Now basically I think our brains have basically our brains have the ability to take whatever we've learned and whatever we are and after at some point we could be saved in some way. So in other words, we have all this information in our heads. Conservation of energy says that information is energy. It's been it's an actual quantifiable energy. So does it dissipate? Does it go away? I don't think so. I think it's still out there. And I think once we get into the quantum realm, we're going to find out that all this information is still there. We just didn't see it.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that argument. If you talk about comfort, conservation of energy, if I've heard a lot of theories that the universe is information-based system. So if you talk about conservation of information, that would be kind of a scientific argument for life after death, or like Akashic records, your soul continues on afterwards. If you talk about,
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, if in engineering school, I mean, you've taken a lot of thermodynamics where you look at
yep,
entropy and you say, well, you really have to get you can't, you can't destroy. I mean, there's a lot of rules that nature has imposed upon us.
yep,
So all these years we have all this stuff going on in our head and it's information. And oh, that's why we can't communicate faster than the speed of light because
yep.
information is energy and energy won't go faster than the speed of light because it's mass. So, that's what I'm saying. Our information that we have in our head has to be conserved somehow. Where does it go? Well, we don't know right now because we're classical based, right? We don't really understand what's going on. But once once our whatever we have stored in our head, we go away, that information has to go someplace.
Hmm. Well, interesting. Yeah, I hope that's correct. Well, and we find out more in the near future. So, thank you so much, Dr. Segala, for being here. And yeah, link is in the description if you want to be a member of this. I think breakthrough experiencer study. Then go click on that link and pay your $30. You'll get it back as long as you're uh, a good participant. So, yeah, thanks, Jim. Any last words you want to say?
No, Chris, thanks for having me on the show. It's really great. Yeah, I know you have a really, really good audience. A lot of people, Carl was telling me that a lot of people that follow you are really sophisticated people. So it's great to talk to them.
Yeah, I think yeah, I love the audience, and they should be a lot of them in the chat. This will be a premiere, so
Cool.
a lot of them will be in the chat. Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
So have a
thank you
great
very
rest of
much.
your day, Jim.